Hello and welcome to another episode of the Franchise Tag podcast. It's me today, Johnny, hosting in for Freddie. He'll be back next week. He'll be glad to hear. But stepping in for today, where we'll be talking all things the good, the bad, the ugly, as usual, on the Tuesday night episode, as we look at three teams who are in very different places at present, as we evaluate how they got to where they are. And their seasons in general and where they go from here. With me, as always, I'm joined by my longtime NFL companion, James Fallows. Welcome, James.
Hi, mate.
We'll start with some of the news. I think we were talking all things Simpsons as their NFL altcast entertained millions overnight for Monday Night Football in the Bengals-Cowboys game. And Bart Simpson throwing for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. Do you think we've got a new late entrant for the MVP race?
Yeah, who knew he got that cannon on him? You know, short in stature, a bit Kyler Murray-esque, big head for the big helmet. I know that these alternate casts do get a bit of a mixed review. I'm for anything that brings the game to a younger audience, that makes it fun for them. If it helps them get into it a little bit more, I think it's great for people with young families and stuff. You know, it brings them together on a Sunday in a different, in a unique way. And yeah, sort of, I know it's a bit silly, and I know that the serious fans don't really like it and stuff, but you just have to take it for what it is. If you don't like it, you don't have to watch it. The proper broadcast is on elsewhere, so it just let people have their fun with it. It's great.
I agree with you. I think, I'm all for these mashups, whether it be The Simpsons, Nickelodeon, or whatever. I mean, they are totally bonkers, as you say, and it probably couldn't work with any other sport. But I think, the NFL and the fandom of the league, embraces this sort of stupidity, and it brings in new audiences, which is, I think, what the game's all about.
Yeah, I mean, say what you want about Roger Goodell, and I know that he gets mixed reviews from, especially stateside. But what he's done for bringing the game to a wider audience internationally, a younger audience in the States and overseas still, it's been great. You can't say that he doesn't love the game and he doesn't love to promote the game, and he knows how to milk that cash cow, that's for sure. So fair play to him. He's moving it forward. He's advancing it in a way that we never thought possible before, and I think that can only be a good thing, really.
Exactly. Let's see where it goes from here. That was Monday Night Football, by the way. The Bengals beating the Cowboys 27-20 in Dallas to cling on to their faint chance of making the postseason. It's currently at 3%. We'll do a little bit of the news before we get into the good, the bad, the ugly. Obviously, that game, Ben DiNucci, I saw, has signed for the New Orleans Saints. Derek Carr is in concussion protocol. Let's see if he gets another chance in the NFL. It was confirmed elsewhere that Jonathan Brooks, the young running back, what an awful start to his NFL career. He's confirmed to have torn his right ACL again after a non-contact injury against the Eagles, and staying in division again with another injury setback for the Buccaneers as they lose Antoine Winfield Jr. to multiple weeks potentially following a knee sprain over the weekend. We'll stick on the Buccaneers for our first section, the good, because after another huge injury setback, they are they've returned to the summit of the NFC South. They're continuing a really good hot streak after beating the Las Vegas Raiders 28-13. We'll come on to the Raiders, I'm sure, in this topic. I'm sure you'll have a few things to say. But Baker Mayfield throwing for 3 touchdowns yet again. 2 for the rookie, Jalen McMillan, by the way. Just giving him a little plug. It's good to see, another wide receiver in Tampa producing. I mean, let's talk about it generally to start with, because we haven't spoken, I think, in detail about the Buccaneers, but how impressed have you been this season with all the question marks around, obviously, Baker Mayfield, who, has shown to be such a tough and ruthless and still a very talented quarterback throughout this season, and the players, that he's had around him, an aging roster. There were question marks, I think, when Obviously with some of the injuries this year, Mike Evans, can he still produce? Levante David as well. This is a team that it's clicking, and they've had major setbacks. What's your take on what the Buccaneers have been able to do this year?
Yeah, I've been impressed with the Buccaneers, to be fair. I think their record is 7-6 at the moment, and they sit atop their division, where I think they rightly belong at the moment. They have been the best team. They've certainly been the best, most entertaining team to watch in that division, and that's quite often that division does get this slide in the line as being a little bit substandard, let's just say. But they've been better than the sum of their parts, I think, and it's been a strange one because, like you said about the injuries, it feels like a sort of revolving door. It feels like one in, one out. That they cannot get what I think is their best team on the field, and at this time of the season, very few teams can. But what they've been able to produce with the injuries that they've had, like you say, especially in key sort of skill positions, Baker Mayfield is really everything. It embodies everything that team is. They're tough to beat. They're hard hitting. They are never really out of a game, and they're just going to give you everything every time. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be super stylish. It's not going to be ultra high tempo all the time, but they are going to find a way if they can. And I remember seeing the play from a few weeks ago where the ball breaks loose near the goal line, and Mayfield is the first to react and jumps on the ball. Like, his really quick, instinctual reading of the game was way above and beyond everybody else that was on the field at the time. And it was those little things that you think, this is why they might just still make that push. And I don't know, I peg them as a bit. I'm obviously going to get like the 4th seed if they finish the top of their division. I don't think they're really going to get anything any higher than that. But
just sticking on that,
play them in the playoffs.
Exactly. That was my question. I think to you is, similar. I've really enjoyed watching the Buccaneers. I love how tough Baker has been, and he stepped up. He's playing his best ball. But my only concern is how they get on in the playoffs. You seem a lot more optimistic, I think, in terms of if they come up against a team like the Vikings, who they're predicted, at the moment, if the year was to end today, that's who they would be playing. Do you think they have a realistic chance of causing what would be, I think, quite a substantial upset against a team like the Vikings?
Yeah, I mean, you would need your Antoine Winfield Jr.'s back for a game like that, you would think. So we'll see what the injury problems are like. If he can get back for then and a couple of others, then I don't see why they wouldn't play the Vikings close. I mean, the Vikings haven't been playing amazing football just lately. They've been finding a way, which is what good teams do, but they haven't been blowing teams away like they have been earlier on in the year. Now, don't get me wrong, you look at a game against the Raiders at the weekend, and it was a very weird game, and the Bucs didn't score in the second and third quarter. 14 points in the first, 14 points in the fourth, and they can't commit the same amount of mistakes against a good team that they did against the Raiders. They actually had less time of possession, but they struggled to convert on third down. 5 for 12 on third down. 4 sacks allowed on Baker. He will give you that chance to get at him because he likes to scramble around a bit and try and buy himself that time, but lost a fumble, threw 2 interceptions. So he is a quarterback that will give you chances to pick him off and whatnot, because he will take those shots down the field that more conservative quarterbacks wouldn't do. But I think they would give a Vikings team at this moment in time a good run for their money. I mean, I could be completely wrong, and they could go there and get blown away because injuries have just keep setting them back and whatnot. But I don't know. They're a team that whilst they're not great, I wouldn't I wouldn't want to be facing him just because you know that there's that chance that they've been running the ball better lately. Bucky Irving's look good. They've got good weapons at receiver. Mike Evans is always super dangerous. And Mayfield is just that guy who he'll bulldoze over people for his team. You quite often see him, the clips of him lead blocking on running plays and, blocking for his tight ends and receivers and stuff just to get that extra yard or two. And they are that kind of team that will be difficult to play, especially in January when you've got fatigue, you've got the sort of lethargic kind of feel to you for the season. So yeah, they'd be a difficult shout, I think.
I think what they've done consistently well over the years is draft well. And this year, some of their, obviously at the weekend we saw Jalen McMillan, step out to have his best game as a pro with 2 touchdowns. Graham Barton, the left tackle, has come in and been a real home run hit. And Bucky Irving's a fan favourite. He actually didn't get a lot of reps on Sunday against the Raiders. Perhaps that's a similar sort of thing to what the Bills are doing with James Cook in, seemingly getting less reps to save them for the playoffs. But those young players have always consistently been big contributors for the Buccaneers. And it might not happen this year for them. They are, they're probably clinging on at this stage. A couple of Panthers win, they could be right back into, they could have been right back into contention. And the Falcons are only a game back despite playing as poorly as they are. It might not happen for them this year, but I think the future is generally very bright for the Buccaneers. Is there, any doubt that you have in mind? Is things like, is Baker the guy who's going to continue to take them to the next level? Do you see this team only getting better in the next 3 to 4 years? With continuing their plan? Is any sort of risks? I think with coaching, Todd Bowles has always been a bit of a question mark, but has seemingly done a very good job this year. Where do you see this team long term? I suppose is my question to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, like you say, they have drafted well, and you would think they are going to need to hit on a few again this time around as well. I mean, I was just looking at their running for the rest of the year to see, what the likelihood is. Chargers next week, Cowboys the week after, Panthers and Saints to close out the season. You would think if they can finish strong, finish top of the division, and obviously if they can make a little bit of noise in the playoffs. I'm not saying they necessarily have to win the game in the playoffs, but just make it competitive, it is what I think we're really hoping for from them. And really, you'd see that more than you see it with Atlanta, I think, who with the other likely team to get out of that division. But I feel more confident in what the Bucs can do over where Atlanta are at the moment. For example, I think coaching-wise, Todd Bowles seems like the guy you would rather take at the moment. Kirk Cousins is only declining, whereas Baker Mayfield seems to be hitting the best that we've seen of him. So he's kind of still in his prime at the moment. And that's what they've got to do, really. They've got to look in their division and say, can we be better than the next best team in here? Can we stay the best team in this division? And then look outside of that and think, how do we build and how do we progress from there? Because like you say, they've got older players. Godwin and Evans, for example, are, no spring chickens at wide receiver, despite their attributes. But McMillan's stepping up. Like I say, they're decent at tight end if they can get the run game going. I think they have got pieces, but they are going to need to keep adding, as every team does. Obviously, that seems a kind of redundant statement in a way, but they're in a place where they really need it now to supplement their older guys, to take some of the reps away from them to save them for these later stretches where they can be more impactful.
Absolutely. Well, one team on the up and seemingly, on course to get in the playoffs, to a team very much on the down at the moment. It's been, I think, all round a pretty positive year for the Arizona Cardinals, but 3 straight defeats, coinciding with a loss to the Seattle Seahawks 30-18 on Sunday. And for a team that was on course to win the NFC West, is now struggling to see where a playoff spot comes from. James, 3 straight losses, as I mentioned. Obviously, the heartbreaking last gasp defeat to the Minnesota Vikings, which is sandwiched in between 2 defeats to their divisional rivals, the Seahawks. For me, this Cardinal team, I think it was obvious on Sunday that the Seahawks are just a much better team. They have much better players. What's your take on where the Cardinals are at the moment? How they've been able to perform this year without, I was, someone who picked them as a bit of a dark horse for the playoffs. I think they play tough. I think they've got, some good young players, but certainly not necessarily the experience and the top tier, roster personnel to, make them into that sort of top upper tier of the NFC. What's your take on the Cardinals and where they are at the moment?
Yeah, sitting at 6 and 7 at the moment, 4 wins on the bounce, and then now had 3 losses on the bounce. So it's been a real mixed bag for them this season. The fans sort of been going through the motions quite dramatically. I think they've actually been much better than I anticipated at the start of the year. I didn't expect a lot from the Cardinals at all. I thought they'd finish dead last in the division and have sort of only picked off maybe 4 or 5 wins max. When you sort of looked at the schedule at the start of the year, didn't really see them winning any division, any games in their division, and obviously they've lost twice to Seattle. But they're a young team, and this year I think was about experience and getting reps into those younger players, being able to look to the year beyond this to again fill out their squad in free agency with some more experienced veterans to aid Kyler, to protect him better on that line, maybe to offer something more extra in the wide receiver, and then again supplement through the draft. It's weird because I think they've played quite well defensively, way above where anybody really saw, and that's where a lot of where their inexperience is on that side of the ball. These losses that they've had, again, super close against the Vikings, real shootout game, and I don't think they've played badly, really. I know that they're 2 games against the Seahawks, 16-6 and 30-18 makes it sound like they really got a heavy drumming, but I don't know. There's something about this team that's plucky and that keeps going, and I like Kyler as a quarterback. He's really difficult to bring down, and he'll give you the chances to extend plays and stuff in a similar way that Mayfield will, but with more evasiveness, more than just steamrolling a guy or bowling a guy down or whatever. I think they're in a good place. I wouldn't be too downhearted if I was a Cardinals fan at this moment in time. I don't know about yourself. You said you had them picked as a bit of a dark horse for a wild card spot.
I think obviously, momentum-wise, they are in a bit of a rut. But I agree. I think they are having what I would say a good season for their expectations, probably across the league and across general NFL fans. In the last 2 weeks, as you say, or last 3 weeks, sorry, they are probably one play away, one play going their way away from 2 wins, and they're atop the division. So I think they're definitely still in the hunt. Like you say, they're a team that always plays hard. I think there is a little bit of overperformance from across where the roster is, and probably their best players, their stud players are obviously expected. A lot more of Marvin Harrison Jr., who, has performed okay, but is, the expectations on him were to be one of, if not the best rookie wide receiver that we've ever seen. So I think there's a bit of an imbalance in the team in terms of experience and quality, I think. But I think they are, this was definitely a year of progress. It's just whether or not you would say it's been a bad season if they miss the playoffs. I think even, looking at Kyler's walk-off, on Sunday, obviously, sacked to lose a game, and, what was, albeit, a very, what would have been, a pretty, a touchdown, which would have counted for nothing, given, the scoreline.
Yeah.
Do you think that plays a part, though, that sort of mentality and, the crushingness of how they lost and how they weren't able to get a little bit of something from the game? Do you think that'll, particularly for Kyler Murray, because of how disenchanted he looked walking off the field, do you think that could play a part in how they looked for the rest of the year? Because they obviously are in such a good position, I think, to make the playoffs, in a very realistic chance. But I don't want the sort of way they play to drop off. I want them to keep at that level. Do you see this defeat in particular having a major impact on what they're able to do in the next 4 games?
It's difficult because he does seem like a guy very easily impacted by the little things not going his way. They seem to, he has in the past seemed to get his head down quite quickly when he throws an interception or, something doesn't quite break his way. It's hard to read at that particular time. It could just be the frustration of not getting more from the play, of knowing he could have done better, and he might just shrug it off. He does seem to have, I think, this season and last season as well, to a degree, matured. I think he's grown since he's come back from his injury. He knows where his limits are, whereas I think before he was trying to push too far beyond them. And
do you think he's the guy? Do you think he's a guy long term for the Cardinals? Yeah. At this moment in time, yeah, definitely. I mean, I just think if you were to, I always just think of it like this: if you were to say that he isn't the guy, is there going to be another team in the league that comes in after him? Yeah, immediately, multiple teams. And so if he's the guy if he is other teams see him as a starting quarterback in the league, then you should as well. And especially when you've kind of built your offense around him, and that is what you really have to do. And his connections with guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. will come. They'll get better. It takes reps, it takes experience, and obviously the rookies don't always hit immediately. And it's easy to say, okay, well, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the guy that he's going to target, so we're just going to double him up. And when he doesn't get the plays, doesn't get the ball as many times as he wants, and he gets frustrated, or he doesn't make the catches he thinks he's going to, again, it's easy to get disheartened. But that is the league. This isn't college anymore. This is another level. This is a big step up from there, and things aren't going to go your way because you're not going to be the guy. You might have been the guy coming out of college, and people might have pegged you as being the guy coming into the league, but that doesn't mean that the opposition defenders think you're the guy. You are the target. You are the guy they want to shut down. They are going to come after you and make life difficult for you. And so I think he's had a bit of a difficult learning curve this year, but one that he can certainly get better from because he's got the tools. Absolutely. I completely agree with you in terms of Kyler Murray on his day is one of the best players to watch in the entire NFL. I probably wouldn't go as far as what Jonathan Gannon described him, I think, a couple of weeks ago in the first defeat to the Seahawks, saying that Murray was the best player on the planet. But he is the guy for the Cardinals, and I think it would be silly for any new conversation to come up about whether or not he is or isn't. He is going to be there long term. I think it is a question of confidence, though. And that obviously affects his performance.
I was going to say that as well. I was just going to say, do you think it is all about confidence with a lot, not just Kyler, but with a lot of players on this team, and with looking forward, is it using the rest of this year to see just how far you can push these teams? Because they've got the Patriots, the Panthers, the Rams, and the 49ers to close out the season. If they have got a chance, they're going to have to really win out the last 2 games, with them being division games, and one of those other 2 as well, you would think. And the Panthers have been playing well. The Patriots are a mixed bag. I mean, out of those 4 games, I wouldn't say 4 wins, but they're going to need 3 at least if to qualify for the playoffs.
I think, even if they are, to win, or regardless of how many more games they win for the rest of the year, if they fail to make the playoffs, I think they need to win a few games in the very least in terms of players getting back on the roster. This is a team who we now consider to be, a team that is tough, that plays tough ball without necessarily having the elite capabilities of some of the other teams. So I think it is a big question about the locker room. I think, now we've seen question marks about the locker room, whether that be on Kyler, maybe even now the coaches. Is it Jonathan Gannon's come out of nowhere, really, and he's still quite, I think, an unknown character in then the plaudits are only going to come back to him, really. I do think it is all about confidence with this team.
I don't think there's any need for them to jump ship on anything at the moment. They need to steady the course, and that's really what the Cardinals, I think, have been missing the last few years. It is that steady hand on the tiller. It's time to look at getting more consistent. I think the Patriots game at the weekend is huge. Obviously, it's not really got massive implications at this particular stage, but for them, like you say, for confidence, it could be huge, and especially going into in 3 weeks' time, the game against the Rams, who, after what they did against the Bills, I would be saying the Rams have got a better shot at reaching the playoffs than the Cardinals at the moment. And I do think they are a better team all round. But the Cardinals could certainly make some noise and have a bit of an effect on how the rest of this playoff picture just shapes out for some of these teams.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I don't think I've got anything more to say. They're in a bad spot, but I think the future is generally bright, and it could be as bright as, the next couple of months could be very bright for Arizona. So from a bad team with possibly good prospects to a team with very ugly prospects and a very ugly team, ugly future. Producers have been so kind to us this week, and the ugly team is, of course, the New York Jets. Losing in overtime, confirming their fate of a 14th straight year without a playoff berth, the longest active drought in playoff sports. James, I'm going to take a backseat with this one. Obviously, as a Jets fan,
okay,
I have complained and said all sorts of things about this team and their quarterback and their coaches. We'll talk about the game a little bit, but I just want you to sum up the state of the Jets after another dismal ending on Sunday. What's your take?
It's really hard. It's really hard to analyze the Jets at the moment because, they show these flashes and you think, this they could have something if they run it back next year. Let's say they run it back with Aaron Rodgers and stuff, and he says he wants to play, and he says he's pretty settled in New Jersey, and he says he was planning on being there for another couple of years. So let's hypothetically say that he stays. It's not going to be as bad as it was again this time around. The defense will improve. The line can get better. And that's really where they need to look to build in the offseason if he is going to stay. The pieces are there at skill position. You've been unlucky with injuries, especially at running back. There's been no real consistent partnership built there between Rodgers and any one guy. I mean, Rodgers has been one of my favorite players in the league ever since he came into it. I just think he's been such a solid quarterback. His reading of the game has been great. And he has lost a step, and maybe it is, his career is it is in the twilight, but he has
It's
still got something to offer, I think. But I just don't know. I mean, I was just going to ask you the question. Do you go new head coach and new quarterback, or do you just look at the head coach and see if you can correct what's gone wrong this year?
Well, here, just from hearing on the grapevine, it sounds like, Rodgers is obviously very up in the air, but the Jets, I think, have been talking, I've seen Rossini saying on Twitter that the Jets are planning to draft a quarterback regardless of whether they keep Rodgers or not. Could that play into the hands of keeping Rodgers around for another year as as the starter and hoping to help develop a young quarterback? Obviously, Rodgers has, I'm not sure how he would feel about that, obviously, knowing what his reaction was to the Jordan Love trade, but the organization that obviously worked. But I mean, for me, just looking at the game on Sunday, it's just taking that as, on its own. Obviously, Rodgers threw for 300 yards. It was probably his second best performance as a Jet. Wilson and Davante Adams both had 100 plus receiving yards, and the Jets were leading well into the fourth quarter. I can't believe that they lost this game with, their opponent right at the end being down and had no timeouts remaining. That just talks to me that they are just a bad football team, and it's not necessarily on the quarterback. Yes, Rodgers has been awful, but this is a team that I think has been able to mask, particularly on defense. The last couple of years, people have been praising how good they are on that side of the ball. I think they've been masking this operation for such a long time, and they are, just a bad team. In terms of the Rodgers, it's really difficult because obviously, when we drafted Sam Darnold, the noise was there that he was going to be a really good quarterback. Obviously, didn't work out, and obviously see what he's doing now. I was so optimistic for Darnold, probably less so for Zach Wilson, but above all of them was Aaron Rodgers because of his credibility. And now in hindsight, I think we're seeing older veteran quarterbacks struggle in their first move after staying with the franchise for a while. So I think in that regard, it probably wasn't the best move. And now I think we're desperately in need of a cultural organizational overhaul. It's just frustrating because I don't see where the Jets go from here. Part of me wants Rodgers to stay because I still believe that he can be and is the best option at quarterback. It's a really difficult one. I think the team just needs a complete overhaul. That means getting rid of players. Whether that what that means for players like Davante Adams, even on the defensive side of the ball like Quinnen Williams. Players who obviously big contracts, but I think will be itching at the bit to move away and get on a team that is win now. Because I think if you go down the new quarterback route, it probably was a team like the Bengals or the Texans, who were in their first couple of years with a new quarterback, able to transition so well. I just don't see it for the Jets, unfortunately. It's a really difficult one. I mean, where they go from here, obviously their season is over. In terms of those next steps, we've touched on the quarterback, but obviously the head coach situation has made a huge difference. With the sacking of Robert Saleh, pretty much around the start of the season after the Vikings game, they have a huge gaping hole at head coach, and they have to get this appointment right. I've heard from numerous people about offering different views, whether they go experience or draft a new upcoming coach. I'm sure this opening will be, well, I hope it's very attractive. But what's your take on the head coaching position as a whole? Do you have someone in mind who you think could come in and really change the cultural aspect of of the organization. Obviously, they'll be taking a new general manager as well. But where do you see the head coach position this time next year?
Really difficult one, because obviously, well, first off, I'll start by saying that one good thing that has happened about there not being a particular uptick in performance is that you haven't had the issue that some teams have and the Raiders had last year, where you play really well for an interim coach and then you're kind of forced to give him the job because he seems to have done a better job, but actually were the players just playing better because they were pleased that the old guy left and not necessarily everything that the new guy did, and then maybe things don't go quite as well the next time around. So yeah, you've got a nice clean slate. You'll have a break. I mean, Ben Johnson is the name. He's the name that everyone wants. And
do you think he is, enough of a, obviously we know how good his offense in Detroit is. What concerns me about Ben Johnson, and this is probably me not, knowing enough about him as a person. But what concerns me is he will come into such a toxic organization and just won't have, a playing field as a leader and someone who, can really get a locker room going. Do you think he is different? Do you think his coaching ability just stands up above all else and will be able to, transform some of these players? Because obviously the Jets offense has some excellent players, even some of the rookies who've been contributing this year. He can do a lot with them. It's just more, about an organizational fit for me.
Yeah, I mean, he's been at the Lions since 2002, so he's overseen a decent, a good rebuild with that squad, and the Lions were as toxic as any organization, not necessarily because they were a quote unquote bad organization, but they were just a losing organization and they just couldn't stop losing. And since he and Campbell and others have come in, they have managed to turn it around. And what he's done with Goff, I think, should be quite promising if you are going to keep a veteran like Rodgers. He's looked at what he does well, maximized his potential with that, added a few more simpler elements to his game, not relied too heavily on him playing hero ball all the time. And maybe he can analyze where Rodgers is, get a good read on him, and you can maybe sort of stoke a new fire under him from there. Would that be a guy that Rodgers wants, though? That's another question. And that relationship is really going to be crucial. Obviously, drafting in a quarterback as well. I don't think it's the richest draft class, but does that light the fire under Rodgers as well, like it did with Jordan Love? It's just a lot of question marks. But Ben Johnson would be the guy that I think most teams will want. And I think New York will be in the running for him. I mean, I know everybody talks about the Jags as being this sort of great opportunity and everything because of Trevor Lawrence and everything else, but I just don't see it. I mean, I don't dislike Trevor Lawrence. I just don't think he's this dynamic QB altering, next generation kind of player, because he's been in the league a while now and we haven't really seen it. So is that been the coaches, or is it just because his play is a little bit more limited? It's really difficult. I think the Jets is one of the most attractive positions, honestly.
Do you think they are attractive? Now, this might be me being, as a classic Jets fan, being, completely optimistic without taking any recency into account. Do you think that's because there is still the potential for this Jets team to go really far if everything clicks? There's obviously uncertainty, but there's also an element of, all right, Aaron Rodgers, when he performs, he's still one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Do you think that's still the case? Do you think people are still thinking that about the Jets, or is that just classic New York Jet fan mentality?
No, there is something to it, because there are players there. There are excellent skill position players there, both young and old. There are younger players like the Garrett Wilsons there. They're older heads like the Rodgerses and like the Devontae Adams and stuff who can still perform. There are definitely pieces there to think that if you can if you can correctly put this jigsaw together, then it will paint quite a good picture, and what that culminates in will be getting rid of that non-playoff curse. I mean, I was just looking at the odds for the other coaches. I mean, Mike Vrabel's a name, but is he that different to what Salah was? That big sort of burly figure on the sideline, but he knows how to change, he knows how to maximize an organization. But is Woody Johnson going to allow him the freedom and the control that he would want? And this is why it's going to be really difficult. Brian Flores at Vikings, he would certainly help pick up the defense, you would think, as potentially Aaron Glenn would from Detroit. I don't know. It's really tough. The names are good. The fit is difficult. I mean, I think you need to get in. You tried it with a defensive guy with Salah, and he did get the defense playing well for a time, but the offense was really stunted. So do you go the other way now? Bring in a young offensive-minded guy, and hope that he can make a good appointment at DC and they can complement each other nicely. I really think that's the way that they should go. And if they're not going to do that, you look at a guy who can change the culture of a team, who has experience doing that, and maybe look at Mike Vrabel. And whilst it's not the coolest or the most glamorous hire that you can have, you do know that he is a safe pair of hands, and that he will go into that organization, he'll rid out the dead wood, and he will try and build a team that plays in the way that he sees the game, the way that he used to play it, tough tackling, hard hitting. I think the defense will take an uptick again. So I think it's one of those two ways to go, but I would be pushing as much as I could for a young offensive-minded guy, and maybe sticking with Rodgers. And if that still doesn't work, then there's a young guy by the name of Manning who's a possible draftee for the following year.
His dad and his brothers, his uncles will be doing absolutely everything to make sure that does not happen. I mean,
I can't see that happening, but you can only dream, mate. You've got to dream.
A Manning playing for the Jets. Wow, we can only dream. Well, we've come on to the end of the podcast. Now, James, I don't know if you've got a cool throne hot seat for this week, but I thought I'd do, one or two for myself, unless you've got any to add in.
Let you jump, mate, and I'll see where we go. And I've got a couple of ideas, but I'll start off with mine. My cool throne actually goes with someone who has, he's in my head now because he's a former Jets player, but Sam Darnold with a career day for the Minnesota Vikings against the former Vikings QB. Kirk Cousins absolutely outplayed Cousins in that game with 5 touchdowns, throwing for well over 300 yards. Darnold and the Vikings are legit. There were some concerns, I think, over the last couple of weeks, I think, with how well Darnold was pushing the ball, whether or not they're a complete contender in the NFC. I think they are. They have obviously the talent. The defense is playing so well. And Darnold has surely earned himself a return job in Minnesota next year, whether or not they keep, obviously, with JJ McCarthy in town. Darnold's having a stellar year and just showed out once again on Sunday. He is my cool throne this week. Who are you going for? Yeah, it's funny because he was my hot seat a few weeks ago because the Vikings seem to have been regressing, and I thought the Darnold regression was in, but he's been playing really well. So happy to eat humble pie on that one. So for this week, I'm gonna go stick with QB. I'm gonna go with Matt Stafford this week. His display against the Bills, against Josh Allen, he's the older guy, the older statesman in the league, but he just did not blink. This guy just saw what was coming at him. Now, this wasn't like an elite defensive display from any team. It was proper shootout football, which was just amazing to see. And yeah, he just didn't falter. He was finding his targets, cut Nakua, and Nakua would have been a good shout for this week as well. I think as some of those catches were incredible, but you you can only catch it if it's thrown your way. And that's why I think I'm looking at Stafford this week and thinking, Silver Fox has still got it, hasn't he?
I like it. Well, I'm actually going to stay in that game for my hot seat. It's quite a rogue one because I think this is very recency bias, purely going on week 14 with my pick. Sean McDermott, I think he's been, him and the Bills, he's been coaching brilliantly this year, but allowing the play call to run on what potential, to run the ball with Josh Allen and wasting a timeout, which when they potentially could have got the ball back and gone on a bit of a run to get a field goal. I don't know. Maybe that decision at the time watching it was quite confusing, and it's got a lot of stick in the press and online about it. Could that potentially, that loss, come down to what makes or breaks whether the Bills get in the 1 seed or not? It's certainly looking that way now. They've dropped down a game on the Chiefs. Could that come back to haunt them? Let's see. Who is on your hot seat this week?
Hot seat this week, and I do feel bad because obviously the injuries happened, and he's a former Raider, so I hate to really knock on him too hard. But Derek Carr has just really done everything that he can to play his way out of New Orleans. I think I don't know if you saw the play that caused the injury at the weekend. Just an absolute crazy play. Why he was leaping over those guys there and that landing, he's not the most mobile guy, and he just went up so high and had to come down so hard. But he's out now, probably for the rest of the season. And is that his time done in New Orleans? Because it hasn't gone well, and I don't think he's particularly well liked by the fans or the team in general, because he's just not shown them a lot. And so, is he on his way out of the team? Does he get another job in the league? That's why this is such a potential hot seat, because not only could it be out of New Orleans, is this you're now a backup at best, or is Derek Carr looking at possibility of retiring if he can't get a starting job? It's a few question marks around Derek Carr at the moment, unfortunately.
Difficult time indeed for the Saints QB. We wish him all the best in his recovery, but could that be him done as a starter in the NFL if he doesn't make it back this year? Well, James, thank you so much for joining me on what was, a little bit of a different Tuesday night podcast with me, your host. Freddie will be back next week, and the guys will be back as well later in the week with the betting show ahead of week 15. The NFL is ramping up into the late stages of the season. No buys left. All teams will be playing this weekend. Promises to be one of the best. We look forward to reviewing with you next week. All the best and speak soon.